Welcome to Founding Chronicles. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Quick question, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into the story of Hannah of Charleston, the cook who poisoned her masters and ignited uprising. Charleston in the late 18th century was a city of contradictions. Its cobblestone streets echoed with the clip-clop of horse hooves, and its grand homes gleamed in the southern sun, a testament to wealth built on labor no one dared to speak of openly. The air was thick with the scent of salt from the harbor, mingling with smoke from the chimneys, carrying the invisible weight of secrets held in kitchens and back alleys alike. For those walking past the ornate balconies and manicured gardens, Charleston was a jewel of prosperity. But for those who worked behind closed doors, it was a world of suffering, injustice, and quiet desperation. Hannah was born into that world, a child of Charleston, whose life was shaped by hardship and circumstance. Her family's lineage traced back to generations of enslaved people and servants, and from the moment she could walk, Hannah understood the rigid rules that governed her existence. She moved through the grand homes with silent efficiency, learning the rhythms of cooking, cleaning, and tending to the whims of the city's elite. In the kitchens, she became invisible, yet indispensable. No one thought much of a cook's life, but Hannah absorbed everything the grudges whispered between servants, the careless cruelties of masters, and the hidden resentments that festered beneath polite smiles at dinner tables. Her young life was punctuated by small, sharp injustices. A dropped tray would earn a scolding. A moment's hesitation in serving tea could bring a lash of anger or a public humiliation. She learned to smile while her spirit was crushed, to nod while her hands trembled from exhaustion, and to hide the fire that burned quietly in her chest. It was in these moments, standing over pots and pans, while the world outside seemed impossibly distant, that Hannah began to understand the power of patience, observation, and subtle rebellion. The home of Colonel Thomas Wainwright became her world. It was a grand estate, where magnolia trees cast sprawling shadows over polished floors, and the air always smelled faintly of expensive perfumes and roasted meat. Colonel Wainwright was a man respected in Charleston society, a figure whose name carried weight in politics and the militia, but in his home he ruled with a harsh hand. Hannah learned quickly that survival meant knowing every detail of the house, which servants feared which masters, which rooms were watched closely, and which routines could be exploited. But survival was not enough for Hannah. Deep inside, a quiet fury had begun to take shape. Every injustice she witnessed, every harsh word thrown at a fellow servant, every time a master indulged in cruelty while feigning civility, added to the fire that she kept carefully hidden. In the evenings, after the tables had been cleared and the last candle snuffed, she would sit alone in the darkened kitchen, her mind turning over ideas, plotting ways to regain some control over the life that had been denied to her. It was during these long nights that Hannah began experimenting. She watched the kitchen herbs, learned the properties of roots and powders, and discovered which combinations could make food taste normal but carry a hidden sting. It was not born out of idle curiosity. It was born of necessity, of rage, and of a desire to reclaim dignity in a world designed to strip it away. Slowly, methodically, she transformed her knowledge into power quiet, invisible and deadly power. The opportunity presented itself sooner than anyone could have imagined. The Wainwright family, like many elite families in Charleston, was hosting gatherings, inviting influential laborers and military officers to dine in opulence. For Hannah, these feasts were more than just work. They were windows into the lives of those who had long ignored the suffering of people like her. She noticed patterns: who ate first, who lingered over certain dishes, and who dismissed the servants with disdain. She began to imagine a plan, one that would use the very food she prepared as a tool to shift the balance, however slightly, in her favor, that it started with small doses, subtle alterations that caused discomfort rather than suspicion. A mild illness here, a stomach ache there, enough to make a statement, but never enough to trace blame directly back to her. She watched the reactions with a careful eye, noting who was vulnerable and who was careless. Every cough, every grimace at the table became a piece of her growing strategy. The fear of exposure was real, yet it was tempered by the exhilaration of control, a feeling she had never known in the oppressive world she navigated daily. As Hannah's confidence grew, so did the boldness of her plans. She was no longer content with minor disruptions. The injustices she had suffered and the countless indignities she had witnessed demanded something greater, a reckoning subtle but undeniable that would shake the foundations of the very household that had kept her and countless others in subjugation. She began to prepare carefully, secretly, selecting the moments and methods with precision. Every action, every ingredient, every step was measured. One misstep could mean death, yet in Hannah's mind, the risk was justified. The world that had denied her humanity would soon confront consequences it had never imagined. Charleston slept, unaware beneath the moonlit sky, the grand mansion silent except for the distant murmur of the harbor. But in the kitchens, where shadows danced over pots and flower-streaked counters, a storm was quietly assembling. Hannah, the invisible cook, moved with purpose, her mind sharp, her hands steady, and her heart burning with a sense of destiny that would change not just a house, but a city forever. The first of the grand dinners arrived under a sky streaked with fading sunlight. Guests had begun to arrive, their carriages rattling along the cobblestone streets of Charleston, their laughter and polite chatter spilling into the warm evening air. Colonel Wainwright's estate shimmered with lantern light, casting long, elegant shadows over the manicured gardens. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, fresh bread, and delicate spices, all meticulously prepared by Hannah and the kitchen staff who moved silently under her quiet command. Hannah's hands worked with calm precision as she prepared the dishes that would soon carry her plan into action. Her heart thumped with controlled anticipation. She had selected the ingredients carefully, balancing taste, aroma, and the hidden effects she intended. Each dish was a testament to her skill, but now it held a secret, a carefully measured dose, designed to weaken the masters who had spent a lifetime treating her people with contempt. She carried out her tasks as she always had, but every motion now was layered with purpose. Every slice, every stir, every sprinkle of seasoning was a step toward justice, though it was justice of a form the city had never seen. The first course was served with the grace expected in Charleston's finest homes. The guests complimented the flavors, praising the cook's skill without a thought of the hand that had prepared it. Hannah watched from the kitchen doorway, hidden in shadow, noting each expression, each careless indulgence. She saw the arrogance in their laughter, the dismissive gestures toward the servants, the ignorance that shielded them from the quiet fury gathering at their feet. It was intoxicating, this sense of control, and it steeled her resolve for what was to come. By the time the second course appeared, subtle signs of discomfort began to ripple through the room. A cough here, a flushed face there, small expressions of unease that the guests attributed to the richness of the meal or the Charleston heat. Hannah's pulse remained steady. She observed, noting who reacted strongly and who seemed immune, adjusting her expectations for the coming days. She knew this was only the beginning, the first wave of her calculated rebellion, and it had to be precise. Meanwhile, the household itself began to stir with suspicion. A footman noticed the slightly altered taste of the sauces. A maid commented on the unusual pallor of the colonel's eldest son. Rumors, small and fleeting, began to spread quietly among the staff. Yet none dared speak openly, and Hannah maintained her calm, a silent sentinel in the kitchen, invisible to all but herself. Her mind raced with contingencies, thinking ahead. To each reaction, each potential accusation, each way the household could unravel as the evening progressed. The effects of Hannah's careful handwork grew more pronounced. Guests shifted in their chairs, discreetly fanning themselves, whispering apologies for sudden fatigue or mild nausea. Colonel Wainwright's stern brow furrowed in irritation as he tried to maintain composure, unaware that the chaos unfolding around him was not the result of chance. Hannah, watching from the shadows, felt a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. She had not taken joy in the suffering itself. She had taken satisfaction in the recognition that the invisible had begun to wield influence over the powerful. Of discomfort traveled fast through Charleston's elite circles, whispered between drawing rooms and carriage rides. By morning, rumors of illness at the Wainwright estate had spread to neighboring households. Some assumed it was a passing fever, others a simple upset stomach from the rich fare. But Hannah knew differently. She had started a ripple, a tremor that would continue to grow, affecting not just one household, but a network of influence that relied on the unquestioned authority of the masters. Each act of weakness among the elite emboldened those who had long been silenced, though none could yet connect the pattern to a single, determined cook dot within the Wainwright home. Tension escalated. The colonel's sons, once boisterous and confident, now staggered slightly under the subtle effects of Hannah's intervention. Arguments erupted over trivial matters. Tempers flared at imagined slights, and the household's carefully maintained order began to crack. Servants whispered in corners, exchanging knowing glances, sensing a shift in power they had never dared acknowledge before. Hannah, ever vigilant, monitored each reaction with a blend of professional calm and simmering satisfaction. Her actions were invisible, yet undeniably potent. And yet, even in the midst of her careful orchestration, Hannah's mind returned to the larger picture, the deeper injustices that had brought her to this point. Charleston's streets were lined with poverty, hidden behind the gleaming facades, its economy built on the backs of those denied freedom and dignity. Every act of subtle disruption within the Wainwright home was not just revenge, it was a spark, aimed at the broader system, a challenge to the authority that had oppressed countless lives. Her hand, steady in the kitchen, had become a symbol of what could be achieved when the unseen dared to act. But power always carries risk. By the third day of the subtle afflictions, some of the more cautious guests began to question the cause. A visiting doctor, summoned quietly by the colonel's wife, examined the household with careful attention, noting patterns that seemed unusual but difficult to trace. The specter of exposure loomed like a shadow over Hannah, yet she remained composed. She had prepared for contingencies, anticipating suspicion and plotting ways to deflect it, to maintain the delicate balance between secrecy and impact. Each careful calculation reinforced the tension that hummed through the mansion, the thrill of invisible influence mingling with the ever-present danger of discovery. The household descended further into disorder. The colonel's temper flared, with each perceived weakness among his family and staff, while servants grew bolder in their hushed communications. Hannah felt the weight of history pressing down. She was a single figure, small yet resolute, challenging centuries of subjugation with nothing more than intellect, courage, and a careful command of what most considered mundane kitchen labor. Her actions were shaping a story far larger than herself, an unfolding drama that would reverberate far beyond the walls of one home. As the fourth evening approached, Hannah prepared for the most decisive phase of her plan. Every movement, every measured action, was a step toward a confrontation that would not be violent in the traditional sense, yet would strike at the very heart of authority and control. The tension in Charleston was palpable, even if most citizens, remained unaware of the storm brewing in the kitchens of one grand estate. The invisible hand of a determined woman, working quietly in the shadows, had begun to reshape the lives of those who had long believed themselves untouchable. Hannah's gaze lingered on the polished dining table, the gleam of silver reflecting. Lantern light, the carefully arranged plates of food that concealed her quiet power. She felt the strange duality of her situation, the danger of exposure, the exhilaration of control, and the undeniable sense that her actions were part of something greater than mere revenge. In that moment, she understood that history was not only written by the powerful in their halls of influence, but also by those brave enough to act from the margins, unseen yet unstoppable. By the dawn of the fifth day, Charleston was stirring with whispers. In the narrow alleys and bustling marketplaces, people exchanged rumors of strange illnesses striking Charleston's elite households. Few dared to speak openly of what was happening, but the tension was palpable. Servants, freedmen, and the lower classes watched with quiet fascination as the city's highborn stumbled under invisible forces. Hannah, unseen yet ever present in her kitchen domain, moved like a shadow through her world, alert to every nuance of the household's unraveling. Within the Wainwright estate, the household had descended into chaos. The colonel himself was pale, his authoritative demeanor replaced by irritation and fear, subtle cracks showing in the armor he had maintained for decades. His sons, once proud and untouchable, now leaned against walls for support, grimacing at their weakness. The colonel's wife hovered anxiously near them, wringing her hands as her social sensibilities collided with the mounting reality that something extraordinary and inexplicable was occurring under her roof. The servants whispered in corners, exchanging small glances, emboldened by the visible decline of those who had long oppressed them. Hannah, moving silently from kitchen to pantry, considered the next phase. The initial doses had revealed patterns, weaknesses, and human follies she had anticipated. But she now faced a critical juncture. The risk of discovery was growing with each passing hour. One misstep, a single observant guest, noting an unusual ingredient or the timing of symptoms, could unravel everything she had built. Yet the stakes were too high for hesitation. The injustices she had endured and witnessed demanded that she act decisively, and Hannah understood that true change required courage, not caution. She turned her mind to the larger picture beyond. The Wainwright home. Charleston was a city of rigid hierarchies and hidden resentments, and the ripples she had begun could extend further than anyone realized. The elite had grown complacent, believing their status shielded them from harm. But Hannah's careful orchestration was challenging that belief. Each affected household, each whispered rumor, each subtle sign of weakness in the powerful, was a crack in the facade of absolute authority. Slowly, imperceptibly, the city began to sense that even the untouchable could be made vulnerable. Hannah's preparation for the next grand dinner was meticulous. She selected dishes with the knowledge that each one would deliver both flavor and subtle consequence, her skill in the kitchen becoming an instrument of influence. Her movements were precise and unhurried, a mask of calm that belied the storm. Within, she considered every possibility: who might recover quickly, who might falter, and who might grow suspicious, and adjusted her measures accordingly. It was a dangerous game, one requiring an intelligence honed by years of survival under oppression, and Hannah played it with the care of a general planning a decisive strike. The second wave of feasting brought both tension and anticipation. Guests arrived with faint trepidation, their social graces intact but tinged with uncertainty. Hannah watched from the shadows, noting expressions, adjusting timing, and sensing the subtle shifts in power within the room. The colonel's sons struggled to maintain composure, whispering excuses to avoid embarrassment, while the adults around them tried to mask concern with polite conversation. Every cough, Every hesitation, every pale glance confirmed the precision of Hannah's intervention. Yet with each success came new dangers. Observant eyes began to notice patterns, small anomalies that could not be explained away. A guest remarked on the peculiarity of the dishes. A servant hinted at unusual preparation methods. A visiting doctor probed for underlying causes. Hannah felt the weight of exposure pressing down on her, the very real possibility that one misstep could lead to ruin or death. But she also felt a surge of determination. The injustices of Charleston had persisted for centuries, and the chance to disrupt them, however subtly, could not be abandoned for fear alone. Outside the walls of the estate, Charleston itself was. Responding to the invisible tremors Hannah had set in motion. Markets whispered of sickly elites. Neighbors speculated in hushed tones about strange illnesses and mysterious events. Servants in other households, inspired by the subtle power displayed in the Wainwright home, began to act with more confidence, asserting small measures of independence, speaking back to masters who had long gone unquestioned. A quiet revolution, born of intellect and courage rather than open battle, began to spread through the city, invisible yet unstoppable. Inside the household, the pressure intensified. The colonel's authority was undermined by illness, and his son's weakness emboldened those around them. Servants dared to bend rules previously enforced with fear. Minor rebellions, delayed chores, whispered defiance, small acts of sabotage began to accumulate, each tiny victory feeding into the larger sense of upheaval. Hannah, ever vigilant, watched with a mixture of pride and caution. She knew that the line between triumph and catastrophe was perilously thin, yet she continued to move with purpose, guided by a combination of moral outrage, strategic thinking, and personal resolve. Hannah also felt the weight of loneliness in her rebellion. No one could know what she had done. Trust was impossible, and any confidant could become a liability. The kitchen, once her sanctuary, had become both a battlefield and a prison. Yet she found strength in the knowledge that her actions were part of something greater, an unspoken challenge to the social order of Charleston, and a reclamation of agency, denied to her and countless others. Every simmering pot, every careful preparation, was a strike against centuries of oppression, and every subtle triumph reinforced her belief that even the powerless could influence the course of history. As the days passed, the household continued its slow descent into disarray. Arguments erupted over trivial matters, miscommunications fueled suspicion, and the colonel's authority weakened under the combined effects of illness and mounting tension. Hannah's careful orchestration had transformed the home into a microcosm of broader societal upheaval, a world in which control was no longer absolute, and the invisible had begun to assert itself. The city of Charleston, unaware of the full scope, began to sense the first whispers of change, the tremors of a quiet rebellion that could no longer be ignored. By the seventh day, the culmination of Hannah's plan approached. She moved through the kitchen with calm determination, her mind attuned to every detail, every reaction, every potential outcome. The household, once a fortress of unyielding authority, now teetered on the edge of collapse, and the city beyond was beginning to feel the ripple of her influence. The invisible had acted, and the consequences, though subtle and calculated, would echo far beyond the walls of one home, touching lives and challenging assumptions in ways no one could have foreseen. Hannah understood, in the quiet moments alone, that history was watching her. She was a single figure, small in stature, but immense in impact, shaping the course of events with intellect, courage, and unwavering resolve. Every dish prepared, every subtle dose administered, every careful observation was part of a larger narrative, one that would not be recorded in formal histories, yet would resonate in the lived experiences of those who had long been silenced. She had ignited a spark, a subtle revolution, and its light would continue to spread, challenging the foundations of a world built on injustice. The final week of Hannah's careful orchestration arrived with an almost tangible tension in the air. Charleston's grand houses, once serene and orderly, now vibrated with whispers of illness, unexplained fatigue, and growing unease. The Wainwright estate, the epicenter of the disruption, had become a microcosm of a world turned upside down, a place where the invisible wielded power, and centuries of unquestioned authority were cracking under pressure. Hannah moved through the kitchen with quiet precision, each step measured, each motion deliberate, aware that the culmination of her plan could bring both triumph and exposure. The Colonel, once a man whose commands carried unquestioned weight, now stumbled over minor decisions. His sons, pale and weakened, could barely sustain the pretense of composure. The household staff, emboldened by the growing disorder, dared to speak and act in ways previously unthinkable. Small rebellions multiplied like sparks in dry tinder, and Hannah watched from her vantage in the shadows, understanding that the very foundation of the household's authority was unraveling. She felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction for the justice being enacted, sorrow for the suffering, even if brief, required to achieve it. Word of the strange events at the Wainwright home reached Charleston's elite in waves, carried by servants, merchants, and visitors who could not help but notice the faltering of those who were once considered untouchable. Conversations in parlors and along the streets shifted in tone. Speculation, fear, and curiosity mingled with disbelief. People began to question the invincibility of wealth and status, realizing that the invisible could influence even the most powerful. In quiet homes and bustling markets, Hannah's subtle revolution took root, shaping perceptions and emboldening those who had long been forced into silence. Despite the chaos, Hannah maintained her composure. Every dish served, every interaction with the household staff, every careful observation was part of a delicate balance between power and secrecy. Exposure remained a constant threat. One miscalculated movement, one suspicious glance, one casual remark could undo everything she had painstakingly arranged. Yet the risk fueled her resolve rather than diminishing it. She had seen a world built on injustice, and she understood that meaningful change required courage, patience, and precision. Her careful orchestration had transformed her from a servant, invisible to the powerful, into a figure capable of shaping events in ways the city could barely comprehend. By the 9th day, the household had reached a tipping point. Arguments erupted over minor disagreements. Meals were left untouched out of fatigue or suspicion, and the Colonel's authority crumbled under the weight of his own illness and the subtle undermining orchestrated by Hannah. The son's weakness and the staff's newfound boldness created a tension so thick it was almost palpable, a storm hovering in every room, every hallway. In the kitchen, Hannah prepared her final dishes with meticulous care, knowing that this week of quiet revolution would soon reach its conclusion. The climactic dinner arrived under lantern light, the house filled with both the expected elegance and an undercurrent of apprehension. Guests noticed the faltering energy, the pale complexions, the small gestures of unease. Yet no one suspected the hand behind the disruption. The cook, invisible in her mastery of preparation, guiding events, with a combination of intellect, courage, and quiet defiance. Hannah observed each face, each expression, each whisper of concern, and felt a profound understanding of the power she wielded. She was no longer simply a servant. She had become a force that challenged assumptions, disrupted authority, and inspired a subtle but undeniable revolution. As the evening progressed, the effects of her careful measures were fully realized. Conversations faltered, tempers flared, and even the Colonel, whose pride had once dominated the room, was reduced to a pale shadow of his former self. Servants moved with confidence, stepping lightly through the charged atmosphere, knowing that, for once, the balance of power was shifting, if only slightly, toward those who had long been denied agency. Hannah watched silently, her heart a mix of exhilaration and solemnity, aware that her actions had irrevocably altered the dynamics within the household and beyond. Yet even as she achieved her goals, Hannah understood the fragile nature of her position. The risk of exposure lingered, and she knew that the consequences of discovery could be severe. History rarely rewards the invisible, the quiet, the unseen actors who defy authority. But she also recognized that change, even subtle, was worth the danger. She had struck at the foundations of power, disrupted a system that had thrived on oppression, and ignited a spark that could inspire courage in others long silenced. Her actions would not be written in the annals of official history, but they would ripple through Charleston in ways no ledger, decree, or speech could capture. In the days that followed, Charleston adjusted to the tremors Hannah had set in motion. The Wainwright family recovered slowly, but the household had been transformed. Servants carried themselves with newfound dignity, aware that even those deemed powerless could influence the powerful. The city itself, though largely unaware of the precise cause, began to sense that the social order was not as immutable as previously assumed. Whispers of change circulated in markets, parlors, and along the streets, carried by those who observed the shifting dynamics of the elite. Hannah's influence, though invisible, had become a catalyst for reflection, empowerment, and subtle rebellion. Hannah herself remained in the shadows, returning to her duties with a quiet calm. The thrill of victory was tempered by the awareness of the risks she had taken, and by the understanding that her work was both a personal reckoning and a broader challenge to Charleston's inequities. She moved through the kitchen, tending to pots and pans, speaking softly to staff, her mind ever watchful, ever calculating. Her story, though largely hidden from the public eye, had already begun to reshape perceptions and inspire courage in ways that could not be measured. In the end, Hannah of Charleston became more than a cook. She became a symbol of quiet resistance, a reminder that even those deemed powerless could influence the course of events with intellect, courage, and determination. The poisoned dishes, carefully prepared and meticulously administered, had done more than unsettle a household. They had illuminated the fragility of authority, the potential of the unseen, and the enduring power of the human spirit to challenge injustice. Her legacy, though unrecorded in official histories, lingered in the changed attitudes of those who survived her subtle revolution, a testament to the extraordinary impact of an ordinary life transformed by courage and cunning. Charleston, with all its grandeur and hidden inequities, would never be quite the same. The story of Hannah, the invisible cook who dared to act, spread quietly among those who knew of her deeds, inspiring reflection and courage. She had proven that one determined individual, armed with knowledge, skill, and an unbreakable spirit, could alter the course of lives, families, and even the quiet rhythms of a city built on centuries of hierarchy. Her story, vivid and unsettling, became a lesson in the power of the unseen, and a reminder that history is often shaped by those who act in the shadows, daring to reclaim what had long been denied.